You can clap. You can clap as loudly as you would like. Yeah. Well, good morning, everybody. I want to echo, well, thank you, Colleen, and I want to echo your gratitude to the Art Basel, and especially the conversations team that curated this conversation this morning. I'm Margaret Wang. I'll be your fearless moderator, taking you through this journey of insights on the global art market with a focus on Asia. For me, this is a real honor and privilege to moderate this. Each year, Art Basel, in partnership with UBS, actually puts out an art market report. And for me, I studied economics and art history in college, and I never thought I would get to use both of those fields of research in conjunction as much as I will get to this morning. And I see actually my first sculptor professor here, Tishan Su, who helped me move from studio art by giving me a B in sculpture, and now I'm studying economics and art history. Thank you, Tishan. And so I just wanted to start with, I'll be taking you through, so we will consider, of course, this past year, the major macroeconomic shifts, right, in markets and economies. You're talking about regional, geopolitical conflicts, right, inflation, interest rate movements, and of course, different regions are at different parts of these economic cycles and dealing with them in different ways. Now, concurrently, you think about also all the discourse happening in the international art market, right? The transnational artists who actually move from region to region, who are reflecting where they're from, where they are of. And then when I think about this panel in particular, we were talking about it earlier, right? You read, especially if you're going to the fair today or you go to a museum, right? You read these exhibition descriptions of the artist, where they're born, or where they work or live or have their studio, right? And then where they've also been showing. And then I think of this panel, and I have people who are across Australia and Ireland, right? China and the United States, and then Switzerland and here in Hong Kong as well. And I'm an American based in Singapore. And so I think this is going to be such a great, cross-cultural and transnational discourse. Now, I'll just do brief introductions, but then I'll have each panelist introduce themselves, and then we'll dive in. But for me, this is truly meant to be a conversation with all of you. So we'll do a bit of presentation, we'll do a few questions up here, but then definitely please ask questions, and then otherwise I will cold call, and I'm not afraid of that. And so if you make eye contact with me, that's where it's going. So, okay. So Dr. Clare McAndrew will take us first through actually some of the key insights and trends from the global art market from 2023. That's in partnership with UBS and Art Basel. And she, as Colleen generously also introduced, will have a lot of the insights across economics and the art space there. Then we'll actually focus in on Asia. Xiaoming Zhang is a lead researcher and has been with Northwestern University, but also a number of other institutions, focus on art of the region and all the key markets. And you'll hear a lot about some of the leading ones, but then also some of the emergent ones too. And of course, Adrian Zuercher here, he is part of the UBS, the co-head of the investment teams for asset allocation at UBS, and they have such a strong presence across Asia. So we'll talk about some of the macroeconomic tailwinds from the region itself that'll help deepen the art market and the collector base here too. And so with that, actually, I'll hand off to Clare. I was trying to figure out, I was saying earlier, this looks like, you don't know what you get when you press these buttons type thing, but we think this is for the slides, and so bear with us as we go for it to start, but we'll have some visual references throughout, and again, encourage questions towards the middle and end. So thank you. Thank you for joining us this morning. We're excited.
Thanks very much, Margaret. I appreciate it, and it's great to be here. I'm delighted. I haven't been in Hong Kong since 2019, so it's fantastic to be back again. And we just launched the report on the global art market nearly 2 weeks ago. So there's some really interesting findings. It's based on the year 2023, with a bit of outlook for this year. And it was a really interesting, quite a kind of complicated and complex year with a lot of different things going on in different regions. If we look at the big picture, we'd had a pretty good recovery from the pandemic in 2020, so we saw 2 years of growth after that, and things did slow last year. We saw an easing of sales. They dropped 4% to 65 billion, so slightly lower than the last 2 years, but above the level we were pre-pandemic. And one of the reasons that growth was a little bit flatter was that all the different regions kind of performed quite differently. And actually, Asia was a bright spot last year The bigger markets, the UK and US, had seen really strong recoveries in 2022, especially the US had its highest ever level of sales in 2022, but they slowed down. And China did kind of the opposite, the other, which is in the big three markets. China had a very rough year in 2022 because of the lockdowns. It was kind of a natural thing. Sales didn't happen, people couldn't get out to exhibitions. And then when the kind of lid was lifted at the beginning of January, there was a real injection of activity into the market in early 2023. Things slowed down a little bit after that, but we saw this kind of divergence in these major markets, and that just created a flatter kind of pattern of growth. So we saw everybody kind of going down in the pandemic, everybody recovering in 2021, then this kind of divergence in performance in the last couple of years. And in 2022, that was a positive effect, and last year was a negative effect. So very different performances by different regions. And that's obviously affected the global share. The US still very much on top, 42%, but China, because it had a much better year, shifting up into second place with 19%, just a little bit ahead of the UK. In the report, we covered dealer and auction sales, and dealers did a little bit better than the auction sector. They both dropped last year, but dealers were down by 3% versus a 7% drop in auction sales. But what we did see within the dealer market was really interesting performance by segments. So it was really what was cooling the market last year was that the high end was thinner and performing not as well as the lower end. And you can see that this is a very unusual picture for anyone that's seen any of the reports going back the last few years. It's usually that high end, the dealers in the 10 million plus segment that have the big positive spike, but in last year it was the dealers, the highest value dealers, that saw the slowest performance year on year. They still have improved probably the most if you look at it long term since 2019, but last year there was more activity at the lower end of the market. So even dealers, larger dealers, saying that they were able to sell more lower priced works than their most expensive works last year. What's really interesting too is this evolution of how dealers are making sales. And the gallery is still key, 44% of sales in 2023. Art fairs were 29% of sales, and online through dealers' own channels and externally was 23%. And that's just seen an amazing evolution over time. You can see the big change was during COVID. Obviously, dealers started selling a lot more online. And then fairs came back over the next couple of years. And it's settled very much, I think you can see that in 2023, especially on this new kind of dual path of selling online and offline. And that's quite a different picture. I mean, if you look even within different galleries, it's different. But if you look within Asia, last year, say China, the fair sales were 33%, so above average. Somewhere like Japan was only 11%, so it's a very different picture in different regions. And as well, even gallery sales in China, online is much more important for the galleries, according to the results of the survey that we had, whereas in Japan, it's still a tiny fraction. So it's very different. These macro findings always put together a lot of different information together to get these results. But if you look kind of individually for different businesses, it's a very different picture. But I think it's been a fascinating evolution to see that galleries are really operating on a two-track system now. And I think online is one of the most amazing trajectories we've seen after COVID. The market, this is dealers and auction houses together, it doubled basically during COVID. Even though the market was falling, online sales by the art industry kept growing. And they reached a peak in 2021 of over 13 billion. And it's moderated a little bit since then, but it's amazing. Last year, even though the market dropped, online sales kept growing. And that also assisted by the fact that it was the lower end of the market that was more active last year. And still, it tends to be the case that online is home for lower priced work. Still, I think if somebody buys something very expensive, even though we do see some sales online, it tends to be an offline sale. But it's now 18% of sales are done online. So that's like a normal retail industry. The art market has definitely caught up with other industries. We looked at auction sales, and as I said, they dropped, public auction sales dropped by 7%, and it was really, I think, anyone who kind of read the headlines in 2022, it was a kind of a hard act to follow. There was the Paul Allen sale. There was 6 works sold for over 100 million. There was all these really strong high-end sales. And last year, we just didn't have as many of those. So that's really what took the wind out of the auction sector a little bit. Private sales at auctions grew last year, though. They grew low kind of positive growth in private sales. And that often tends to happen when there's a lot of, as Margaret was saying, kind of political issues, kind of uncertainty, and things going on. People are kind of tend to stick to the private sector a little bit more. And what you can really see, what took the wind out of the sales of the auction sector last year was that 10 million plus segment. So it's the kind of red, very volatile line at the top. And you can see how that was the only segment actually in the fine art auction market that grew in 2022. But it really took a dive. And it's just there was 25% less transactions at that level. So it was thinner at the top is the basic. It doesn't mean prices necessarily for individual works fell, but there was just less of them coming onto the market. And the value in that segment dropped by 40% last year. Whereas if you look at the sub 50,000 segment at auction, that actually grew last year. So it's very, very different performance. And this is what's creating the more muted growth. And again, this helped China as well last year. So China was neck and neck in terms of public auction sales with the US, both 31%, because China operates actually more in the sub 1 million segment, much more. So you can see there in the sub 50,000 segment, China has the biggest share, and it also has the biggest share in the segment between 50,000 and 1 million. But as soon as you go past 1 million, the US really starts to take over. And you can see it there on the kind of the far right, the 10 million plus segment, the US is the most dominant. So it's still really the home to the kind of uber high level sales. So a lot of different things happening in the auction and dealer sectors. And, you know, they happen for a number of reasons, and they also happen because people buy in different ways in different regions. And we did some really fascinating research. This is not in the global report we just launched, but with UBS, we're now doing an annual collector survey as well, and we published that in November last year. And we ask a kind of a range of different questions to high net worth collectors in different regions, and it was amazing to see the preferences for ways of buying art in different regions. And if you look at places like Taiwan, the auction sector is actually preferred by high net worth collectors over dealers. If you look at China, it's neck and neck. So if you include art fairs and dealers together, you can see China is on par in terms of preferences, auctions and dealers. But when you go to places like Japan, Singapore, Hong Kong, dealers are really key. And Hong Kong, obviously, they're also one of the highest for art fairs as well. 19% preferred to buy through dealers at art fairs, and it's obviously the access you would have in Hong Kong is obviously kind of far superior than it might be in some other regions. But it's really interesting to see those diverse preferences, and they will kind of continue to affect the market and how people buy and what they buy and whether they hold on, whether they buy and sell, all those factors going forward. When we did this survey, which was kind of mid-year last year, there was a very optimistic sentiment from collectors. You know, 70% were optimistic, only 10% were pessimistic about this year, 2024, and the rest of them weren't too sure. And it was kind of the same when we asked the art trade at the end of the year. I think, you know, most dealers were kind of cautiously optimistic. I think there was only 25% of dealers in Asia thought their sales would rise this year, but just over 50% thought they'd be stable. So a minority expecting any further losses this year, but a kind of cautious optimism, I think, is probably what we describe the year going forward. Thanks.
Thank you, Claire. Actually, I thought it would be interesting by a show of hands, maybe even just understanding who's in our audience, because we are talking about so many different stakeholders in the art ecosystem here. And so I promise this is not my trick to get you to raise your hand to ask a question type thing, but just out of curiosity, you know, in terms of who here is either like an artist or a researcher or like works in the arts in like an academic way. And I know there are a few of you, so if you don't raise your hands, I know people are lying to me in this audience here. Yeah? Yeah. Okay, good. Yeah, several, a handful. Who's on the gallery side, you know, call it the dealer, right? The dealer on the commercial side or auction houses. Any folks here in that way? Yeah? Okay, great. And then who's here because, you know, they're either buying art, interested in learning how to collect art, or, you know, attending the fair today to do a little research to do so too? Was that That's a majority. Okay, got it. Yeah, and so I think when I think about the art ecosystem, there are institutions and other players too, but these types of insights of understanding, it's almost, to me, it is like client segmentation in some ways, or just even understanding the market of how do you actually reach folks in different markets too. But with the rise of technology, the flattening also of being able to do that as well, much more democratized in terms of reaching folks. When I first saw some of the statistics from the art market report, I was pretty stunned by the concept of overall things are down, but actually volume is up. And that under 50,000 for me, I personally actually love collecting emerging and mid-career artists, and I actually thought that was really quite encouraging, and maybe there's a little bit of that on the rise, especially again out of the Asia region too. And so that's probably both a rise in artists from the region, and then also the collector base too. And so we'll learn a little bit more about that. I'll actually turn now to Xiaoming to take us into the Asia region, and then talk a bit more about that in detail before we jump back out to some of the tailwinds. Oh, yeah, I know this. It's either the codes for a nuclear. Oh yeah. Oh, that's right. Actually, before Xiaoming dives in, I had actually posed a question to my panelists this time in terms of introductions to also share an artwork or something that they've seen recently that has compelled them or intrigued them, and to share a little bit about that. And so you might hear that scattered throughout. Xiaoming will start us off. I know Adrian has one that's pretty unique too, and then we'll come back to Claire because it'll actually may inform what you do tomorrow with your day. And so Xiaoming, I'll turn it over to you now.
Well, thank you so much, and it's an honor to be here, and thanks to everyone, thanks to Basel Hong Kong, and also I want to thank Dr. Clare McAndrew for inviting me, and together with Dr. Huang Jun and Dr. Zhang to contribute to the opinion section on China. So my presentation today, this morning, will be focusing on the upcoming trend in the art market in 2024 in China. What you are seeing here is an image. So I was asked by Margaret to find an artwork that I saw past year, and what came to me into my mind, and also at home, my parents' home in Shanghai, was this image of the dragon, and it's a Tang Dynasty dragon, and this is an exhibition that I worked on back in the 1990s, from 1996 to 1998. It's called China 5,000 Years, Innovation and Transformation in the Arts. It is the largest exhibition that the Guggenheim held together with Ministry of Culture. It's a survey show on China's 5,000 years of history. And we are entering into the year of the dragon. It is a wood dragon. So I also questioned, what is the meaning of dragon? As Chinese, we are the children of dragon, and we are carrying the dragon's heritage. And I also did some studies on the dragon, the meaning of the dragon, and its significance for today. And the dragon is also a symbol for Chinese culture. And in the past, their 9 dragons are flying into different directions. We're entering into a new era. And what I learned are the 9 dragons are flying towards the Mount Kailash into one directions. So Hong Kong is a very special place where the dragons lie, and it's wonderful to be here. What I also learned in Hong Kong is for the Chinese, and dragon is a symbol for China, and we have the mission really to revive the ancient wisdom and the culture, and that can really truly help China to transform. So here I'm going to talk about the market trends in China in 2024. I have all in the bullet points, and I chose images of an artist, contemporary artist, Zhang Xiaodong, and his work is based on the lost tradition. It's called a bookbinding, Tang Dynasty style, dragon bookbinding tradition. And what you are seeing here are the close-up of the images of the 12 dragons. And I would love for you to focus on the image rather than the text. I will read the text to you so you can hear and you can focus on your eyes on the image. So the first point I want to make, and these points were put together under the guidance from Professor Zhao Li from Central Academy of Fine Arts. And the first is, in China, we are going through the strategic adjustment and the cautiously progressing auction market. When the global art market is facing challenges, and the auction houses in mainland China and Hong Kong are also overcoming difficulties. The market is experiencing a decline in transaction rates and average transaction prices, with domestic auction houses showing signs of autumn being inferior to spring. That was last year. And despite the challenges, leading auction houses are adjusting their strategies to mitigate the market downturn. China is the second largest art market trading entity in 2023, is focusing on business transformation and the channel expansion and the digital transaction technologies. The Chinese collecting art market remains active, but with a cautious, optimistic attitude towards the market. And the second point is the financial responses and the transformative innovations in museums and galleries. Museums and galleries are navigating financial challenges. They are exploring innovative financial models and establishing partnership with enterprises, international museums, and enhancing community and international connections, cooperations. Museums and galleries are actively pursuing digital transformation, prioritizing the development of culture, digital infrastructure, and service platforms. Digital technologies are being used to build innovative platforms like online exhibitions and digital museums, providing convenient culture and entertainment experiences. And in such case, we can look at the Sanxingdui Museum. And the Sanxingdui Museum director is a very young director, came from the media industry. So when Sanxingdui went through massive excavation during the pandemic time, the director employed multimedia technologies to bring the knowledge to the public. And in China, virtual museums and digital connections are emerging trends in protecting cultural resources and generating new revenue sources. And when talking about protecting cultural resources, one of the key words in our culture world is called 活化, is to really making the culture relics alive. The third point is art consumption and the industry convergence. Art and fast-moving consumer goods are becoming a market hotspot. Art consumption is a new fashion with art and business intertwined. Museum goers are increasing significantly. I want to give you the case on the some of the numbers from the museum goers. And data from the National Cultural Heritage Administration showed that 383 museums were built in China in 2023, and taking the total to 6,565 institutions nationwide. And they staged 34 of 34,000 offline displays and hosted 587 million visits. And last year, during the 7-day National Day holiday in October, China's museums welcomed 66 million visitors. And the difficulties in the people and the audience, they are having difficulties to get the tickets. And the head of the Chinese Museum Association said he has never imagined that China museums are becoming such a great destination for families and for younger generation. And so the art consumption, as you can see, is a new fashion with art and business intertwined, and the museum goers are increasing. Post-pandemic culture tourism consumption has reintroduced art into streets and villages. Rural revitalization encourages artists to work and practice in the countryside. It's called a 乡村振兴, and is really reviving the countryside. So many of the art institutions, such as CAFA and also China Art Academy, and they also have many programs working with the villages and the local governments to bring the artworks to the countryside. Art and culture tourism has becoming a key social term and bringing new vitality and commercial value. Art is integrating with the modern industrial system, bringing quality and humanistic spirit to future industries. The fourth point I want to make is on the AI technology and the art market. And so this year, while I was speaking to the professors from China Media University, and she said that suddenly the Chinese educational system, they would like to learn AI, how AI can be incorporated into the art market. And recently, I also invited professors from England to China, and from the University of Southampton. University received over 31 million pounds to help Britain with the AI transformation. So in China, China's NFT art scene is evolving and marked by growth and unique challenges. Traditional auction houses such as Yongle and Poly they have held NFT auctions in the past. Technology innovation is driving stability and transformation in the NFT sector. AI's impact on art and artistic rights is a stirring debate. The NFT market is navigating through cautious investment, trends, and regulatory scrutiny. The fifth point I want to make is the gender, ethnicity, and identity in the art market. Increasing focus on culture, diversity, and equality, particularly towards female ethnic minorities. And the presence and engagement of female artists in the art world have grown substantially, but remained marginal, but a heated discussion. Exhibitions from Tibet Autonomous Region travel to the coast cities and vice versa. Greater focus on diversity and inclusion, especially from its younger segment in terms of gender, ethnicity, and identity, is enriching the Chinese art scene. What we are seeing here is an image called the Echoes from the Himalaya Mountains, and it is a show that was held in Suzhou during the pandemic time in 2022, and the exhibition is the largest exhibition to date on a survey of the artistic productions that created from China's Tibet, and also by some of the Han artists that they have been focusing on the Tibetan themes. And so this exhibition is curated by the artist Gade, and so we're here seeing some of the panel discussions was held that during the exhibition. It's called Echoes from the Platform, and in the middle of on the stage is Gade, the artist and the curator, and here are some of the installation shots on this exhibition. The 6 points I want to make, we are seeing the Chinese collectors making efforts contributing to local public museums and communities. These 5 slides were provided by collector Chen Xingdong, and in recent years, he has donated over 200 works to the local museums. This is a group of photographs that he donated to the Shanghai Power Station. And many of the artists that from this collection, I have included these artists in auctions in 2006. And these artists' works are no longer seen in the marketplace, but they are very important to form a continuous narrative for the contemporary Chinese art history. And Chen Xingdong has been committing this group of photographs to the Shanghai Power Station. And the Shanghai Power Station is a municipal museum. And he also donated works to the local libraries as well. The seventh point I want to make is the post-pandemic art exchange and the cooperations. The art exchanges show positive growth as international travel and the trade recover. Major art museums and the museums are exhibiting more international blockbuster shows, especially the National Museum in Beijing and also Shanghai Pudong Museum and the Shanghai Museum. President Xi Jinping will make his first post-pandemic visit to Europe this May, meeting President Macron in France during the 60th anniversary of diplomatic relations amid a revival of the China-France cultural spring. The Palace Museum is also partnering with West Asian countries to showcase exchanges and the mutual learnings between ancient Chinese and West Asian civilizations. Art import and export development is accelerating with standardized systems. Favorable terms are established for special trade zones, especially in Shanghai. The Shanghai tax-free trade zones can receive and waive the import tax, especially for the cultural relics. The National Cultural Heritage Administration has revised restricted artists for art in 8 categories created after 1911 in May 2023. Historical disputes like the recovery of stolen cultural artifacts are fueling tensions amid shifting geopolitics. Bolstering culture and market ties can mediate difference, foster understanding, and create economic communities and harmonies on this earth.
Xiaoming, actually, I might just pause for a second there. No problem. Before we summarize this section, when you were talking about actually the partnerships with a lot of the institutions here and abroad, actually, we're also right now in the week of the Cultural Summit here in Hong Kong, right? And so actually a lot of the partnerships that have been announced transnationally, right, again, between China and, as we call it, right, call it Europe, the United States, and of course West Asia too. We've seen these institutional support for partnerships. That I actually think is quite new in terms of revitalizing and supporting the investment actually in the development of art, especially here in Hong Kong, right? So you have M+. I don't know if many of you had a chance yet to go see it's incredible, right? M+, the Palace Museum, as you referenced as well. And, to me, that is so much about this week's focus in terms of being here physically, but then also how do you connect across? Is that also, that's what you've been also researching and also thinking about too for these different regions?
Yes, that's right. And so what the future could possibly lie ahead for the Chinese art market, we are seeing the slides here. Oh, yes, the 2024 Art Market Trends Report and the China Development Forum in Beijing highlights a convergence of traditional cultural renaissance and international openness. Art market is experiencing cautious progression, digital transformation, and increasing inclusivity. And China's commitment to global integration mirrors the President Xi's vision of a modern Chinese civilization. China's strategy includes internal digitization and diversification in the art sector to rejuvenate its cultural heritage. Externally, China engages with international business leaders, actually today, and in China to reaffirm its openness and the cooperative stance. Art and culture policy continues to contribute to wealth accumulation and wealth release, and advocating for a more inclusive, interconnected, transnational social art ecosystem.
Thank you so much, Xiaoming, for that. And the focus on, I mean, it is, call it unavoidable to, I mean, China is truly the largest art market here in Asia, right? And as Claire had started us off, right, superseding that of the UK to become one of the, to become second right after the United States. Well, I'll turn now actually to Adrian, who is, as I mentioned, with UBS's focus here in Asia, we'll actually talk about the region ex-China, right? Asia ex-China, and just the richness of development for the art ecosystem, for the macroeconomic tailwinds as well that support the collector base here. So I'll turn it over to you, Adrian, and then we'll open up for questions and interactivity as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's important to understand that sort of the social demographics is also shaping the art market here in the region. If you think Asia is half of the global population, and we clearly can see that the economic gravity is shifting from the west towards the east. But within Asia, we also see a lot of shifts within the wealth creation. So you have the first generation which creates the wealth. But we now see, and we are probably in the midst of the biggest wealth transition that we ever have seen historically. So a lot of wealth is getting passed on from the patriarchs to the second generation. But we also see a lot of wealth is getting moved to the female side. So usually the wives are still outliving the husband. So we see a lot of transition of wealth. And that's actually creating also a very different pattern on how these people are spending their money. Philanthropy is a very big topic here in the region for UBS as well. We have our own Optimus Foundation. UBS is a very big art investor as well and collector. And what we clearly can see, and we have this also out of data, for example, that this second generation is much more interested in art. We see this here also on the art fair. And also some of the data we have of the high net worth collector study we do together with Art Economics, for example, we can see that here in Asia, people tend to spend much more of their assets into new artists. So when we did the survey globally, we actually have seen, for example, for China, but also for Hong Kong, that more than 70% of spending is actually going to new artists, while in Europe and the US, people are spending much more of their assets into artists they already know, they're well known, and they have previously invested into. And I think that's a quite nice reflection. We also see, for example, that, and I think it's no coincidence, that Singapore and Hong Kong, next to Germany, have by far the highest spending on female artists. So more than 40% of the spending that has been done in 2023 in Singapore and Hong Kong actually went to female artists. And I think that's related to this wealth transition we do see that's coming through. And so this is a very good reflection of, I think, how Asia is reshaping basically the art scene as well. It gives a lot of opportunities for new artists. We also see that UBS, for example, we just, and we introduced this here, have a new art collection which was commissioned by Chen Wei, is a mainland Chinese younger artist. And the collection is called City Visions. So it's young artists here in Asia that taking a certain new look at the perspective of urban life. So one of the sculptures we actually have in the UBS lounge is a sort of a LED-led sculpture. And it says, "How are you, Hong Kong?" We also have at the UBS Art Studio, for example, a culture of a Hong Kong-based artist, Zhang Kulun, who's an artist that gets inspired by all the neon lights that Hong Kong has and creates basically art out of that. And I think this is the trends we actually do see.
Yeah, and I mean, I was sharing with the panelists that last week I was just in New York, and the amount of actually representation of artists from the region or of the region in New York and U.S. institutions in general, right? Rear Crit at MoMA PS1 or Basita Abad, SF MoMA also going to MoMA PS1. the Whitney Biennial is nearly a quarter actually Asian artists this year. And so to me, that type of, again, like the transnational, but also the support for artists from this region, of course, China being like the big heavyweight here too, but then Southeast Asia and the broader East Asia as well to actually generate that type of creative drive. And so, well, thank you. I know that's a lot of it's a lot of numbers, and it's a lot of deep facts. But I think it's hard to talk about the global art market, especially here in Asia, without couching it in actually some of the facts and figures, and certainly, of course, in the geopolitical perspectives too. But so that's a bit of some of the, call it the content that we'll use. But I actually do want to make sure that we get questions in and make this as interactive as possible. So I know that was a lot, but if folks do have questions, I would love to start us off with a few. I have a couple. Yeah, okay, great. I love it. Right in the front row. Stephanie's coming in.
Hello, good morning.
Good morning. You can introduce yourself if you'd like.
My name is Juan Gavarron. I work in a non-for-profit in different regions.
Amazing.
And I wonder, for Claire, the numbers always fluctuate, but I think, and correct me if I'm not wrong, over the years, the volume of the art industry is around 60 billion. Do you think it's, if I'm not wrong, you correct me, over the years, the decades, what is the real growth of the whole industry besides the big news titles? And what is a trend that you can say for the next 5 years or maybe on the big, on the volume? And for Ms. Zhang, I would like to ask regarding in China the trends. We saw that there was a global trend about Asian art internationally. Now looks like it's a little bit going down. How is the trend within the art or contemporary art based on China for Chinese artists or European, American artists, African artists? How is that going?
Why don't, Claire, do you want to take the first question, and then we'll go over to Xiaoming?
I mean, it depends, really, the growth, it depends on how far you want to look back. If you look back to, the bottom of the market in the early 90s, it was about 10 billion. So it has grown, substantially since that point. Obviously, the global diversity has assisted that growth. But we are stuck a little bit in a wavering pattern around there. And if you take inflation into account, again, as a lot of people ask me, how did that affect the figures? It does, we haven't seen that much growth over the last kind of few years. So it's grown, obviously, in nominal terms. We've come out of the hole from the pandemic, but, if you accounted for inflation, the figures are much more muted than that. And I think there's a few things going on there. I think there's, there is, I track these figures along with wealth figures, and billionaire wealth, for example, is going that way, and other wealth figures. So there's more money being created, but it's not all being siphoned into the art market, and it's not all being siphoned into the art market structure that I look at as well. So I look at galleries and auction houses, and there is activity going on outside those. And there's also activity going on outside. I'm only looking at fine and decorative art and antiques, so I'm looking at a kind of a subset of that. So I think there is more money being filtered into luxury sectors and more money transacting outside that platform. I mean, an obvious example is NFTs, and back in 2021 we all saw those. But there still is there's a couple of billion going transacting on those platforms still, despite the big drop that we've seen, and there is more artists selling works directly. So I think there is growth, but our market that we're probably focused on here is kind of stuck a little bit on a level, and I think it needs obviously a new kind of collectors all the time to make it actually grow more substantially. And I think that's what it's missing, is more kind of young collectors, because it is so dominant. My figures are really dominated by what happens at the high end, even though there's masses of activity. And I didn't discuss the markets earlier outside China. Obviously I've been tracking Japan Japan and South Korea and those markets, Singapore, they all didn't have a great year last year, actually. China was quite an outlier. And I do wonder as well, I mean, China was driven by that injection of post-pandemic spending as well. So there's a lot of activity going on, but very rightly so, not as much growth as you would think, given the amount of wealth generation and things like that, that should be the fundamental drivers. I mean, we're a supply-limited marketplace, apart from, obviously, new contemporary as well, which does put a bit of a lid on the amount of growth.
Yeah.
I think you see more younger people engaging and becoming more important forces in the art market, and especially, as Adrian mentioned, the surveys that we do with UBS have shown the increased activity levels of younger collectors, so millennial and Gen Z collectors being more active. I mean, the spending's still at lower levels, and the boomers have still got the big collections and the bigger kind of spending, but there is a lot of activity going on, especially actually in Asia as well, with younger collectors. And that will be the thing that reignites the, real growth, I think, in the market.
I think what's coming out of this study as well is the volumes actually went up in terms of transactions, right? It's around 39.4 million, but the money spent was a bit less. And I think also, don't forget, interest rates have gone up significantly, particularly when it comes to sort of high-end art. A lot of this wealth creation is actually not liquid wealth creation. It's done by the stock market. This money is stuck. So a lot of collectors, particularly in the higher end, they will need financing for that. Now, the cost of financing has increased significantly. It's 5 times as high as, or 4 times as high as 2-3 years ago. And that might also impact a bit, particularly this higher segment, which I think comes out of the study last year, is actually the one that sort of was rolling over and dipping basically the art sales into slightly negative volumes.
Yeah, I actually would, I appreciate your question. Maybe I would actually make note of two things, though, that Adrian is touching on. So one, so the overall volume actually is up, right? It's just that it's mostly smaller ticket sizes, right, below 50,000. And so I find that to be actually a very encouraging data point, an encouraging trend that I do think actually will increase, right? The 2024 outlook actually this year is that. It's actually quite optimistic. The cost of financing is definitely much more expensive. But then two, what the art market report captures, it's mostly the volume and the transactions between the stakeholders that it mentions, right? So dealers, right, auction houses, collectors, like purchasers. But what it does not capture here is, it's not capturing actually institutional acquisitions, right? Institutional acquisitions of pieces, the institutional shows of shows of these artists too. And again, if you just look at some of the major shows happening in the United States and Europe, and of course here in Asia, Asian art is very visible today, of early, emerging, and mid-career, and also very established artists too. And so that, I think, is probably one nuance I would take, or one lens. When you think about the art ecosystem, there is, of course, this big part of it. But outside of the numbers too, right? Institutional acquisitions, that counts for a big movements as well, and investment.
If they bought from a dealer or an auction house, they would show up in the figures. But if they buy directly from a collector, or if they're buying from anything that, artists are becoming a much more important force themselves. And even though it's not kind of affecting many galleries, there is this kind of disintermediation that's been talked about for the last few years.
Well, people buy art on Instagram. People buy art off of Instagram, or even directly, right? They establish direct relationships with the collectors too. I'm sorry if I see gallerists and dealers in the audience here and auction houses, but I truly think with technology, I again talk about that democratization of access, and I think here we really see the impact of that over the past several years, just in terms of the channels that we talked about today, but then certainly in terms of the flows as well too. But then Xiaoming, maybe you want to hit the second question as well.
Yes, thank you so much for your question, and it's a very important point that the artists are thinking what they want to make, what they should make, and for whom. So there are 2 museums opened in the recent past 3 months and a period. One is a museum called the Will Art Museum that opened this January in Singapore, but the founder of the museum is by mainland Chinese collector, Mr. Fan. And so he focused on two artists. One is Huang Yuxing, the other is Ouyang Chun, and they were born in the 1970s. They were the stars in the marketplace. And so the collector, he himself was born in the 1990s, and he is an avid participator in the marketplace in buying, purchase artworks from galleries as well as auction houses. So he's focusing on the younger artists, 70s, but his programs, when he's preparing for his future programs, he's expanding to international modern contemporary artists. And so that's very encouraging news. They are starting from the current, going back to the past. I visited the museum last week in Suzhou. It's called Iris Museum and the Home Museum. The museum is located in the Jinghu district outside of the old city of Suzhou, and it was also founded by two collectors were born in the 1990s. Again, they started to assemble a collection on younger artists from the 70s, 80s, and the 90s. And the 70s, 80s, 90s, they are the driving force in the marketplace. And also these names, hot names, and the auction houses were put a name list together, say we would like to have included the works by these artists. When I was speaking to the director, and Director Michelle said that we have expansive programs not just on Chinese contemporary artists, and we also will invite international artists to come to China to show, and we will also focus on older generation artists that were born in China and also went through the local school system. In Suzhou, that is case of Suzhou Meizhuan, Suzhou Art Academy. That was one of the earliest art academies in China, looking at the older generations and really doing scholarly research and to organize exhibitions that can go back to the history. So that's really encouraging news to see how the younger people are really making the effort to go back to history and to bring the past to the present.
Oh, yeah, I know, I completely agree. I actually just had a great conversation with an artist yesterday who's using, like ancient philosophies of like the Taoism and Taoism actually to inform how they bring nature into the work today. It was very highly intersectional with the nature, music, and visual arts too. And
Yes,
but very transnational as well. And
there is a video I prepared, but we can show at the very end.
Maybe at the very end.
And
Okay,
it
sounds
is based on the Taoist. It's Cynthia Wu Shaoying is an artist from Macau, and so she used computer-generated flow to mirroring the flow of the ink paintings. And
Exactly,
And,
and actually, again at the outset when I was saying, and we were talking about this before, actually in the green room of, what constitutes Asian art, right? Is it right? Most people would actually mostly think just ink paintings out of China today. Still, right? Still, that is. I mean, we live in a bubble here, right? Everybody here is self-select. You're a self-selected group that chose to come to Hong Kong Art Basel. You already have a deep interest, but the broader communities, right? There's still a very unidimensional, like single-dimensional picture of what is actually art from the region. And now you see these younger artists take a much more multidisciplinary approach, much more, I think, creative approach of how it's informed, but then the mediums they use are totally different. Okay, what other, yes. I love that. That was a fast hand straight through the air.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you very much for the presentation here, very interesting. My name is Matthias. I'm the China correspondent for the Swiss newspaper Neue Zürcher Zeitung, NZZ.
Chinese on the Swiss.
Swiss Daily, yeah.
Perfect.
Swiss.
Yeah.
I have a question for Xiaoming. I follow the Chinese economy very, very closely. I live in Beijing since many years, and as we all know, there are really some economic headwinds this year. The problems at the property market, private consumption, incomes dropping, capital is fleeing the country, mainly moving to Singapore and Tokyo. So what is your expectation for sales in China for this year until, let's say, December 2024 or something? What can we expect? What will we see?
So the Chinese art market is a very young market, and it went through rapid skyrocketing rise, and for the past 30 years. And so for every market, we go through rise, and also we go through steady growth. And I think we are looking at the adjustment in the marketplace, and also how this adjustment can ensure certain steady growth in the marketplace. For auction houses, galleries, and institutions, they are trying to find innovative ways to really enhance the revenues. And we need to face the reality. When we face the reality, we find the innovations and the transformations to progress. So I don't have the crystal ball, but I think we all know Chinese people are hardworking people, and they will find ways to really grow and progress.
Thank you,
Maybe,
Xiaoming. Adrian, yeah.
maybe I can pitch in.
I think she's actually, well, I won't speak for you, Xiaoming, but
That depends, and I think the collectors are looking for really, I mean, in art, it's unique. So if greater works coming to the marketplace, you will see you will see worldwide records will be made. And rise or drop, I do not know, but I think it's a steady growth, yeah.
Well, yeah, I think what you're speaking to is, right, call it natural cycles of any economy or market, right? It's you always have ups and downs, but then through time, actually, how do you establish a sustainable ecosystem to actually support art from the region? And I actually think that is something that has been top of mind, not just within China, but actually the broader region, and also for this, I was saying earlier, right, very visible boom right now of Asian art also in the United States and Europe. That, I think, is actually the even more important, or call it pressing question for a lot of these institutions and supporters. Adrian, did you have a...
Yeah, I think my two things. Well, yes, the Chinese economy is facing huge structural issues and cyclical issues as well. I think last year, and it's coming out also of the report, we clearly could see the effect of reopening. So the first half of spending was actually stronger than the second half of spending. So I think it was first half was $241,000 US dollar, and while the second one spending per high net worth collector was around 200,000. UBS expecting around 4% GDP growth. The government sees it around 5%, so we're a bit more cautious than the official number, because we see the structural issues, but we actually do think that the quality of growth will start to improve. You should also not forget that there's an excess amount of household savings that is with the household currently, because through the pandemic, people didn't spend so much. Last year, it reopened, people went out and spent some money, but there's still a lot of excess saving around. So if confidence is coming back that the economy, in particular property markets, start to stabilize, we still expect a small contraction, but much less than last year, that some of the spending can be activated. And I think one of the, and you mentioned that already, Claire, one of the surveys with the dealers clearly shows that around 50% see the market flat for this year, 25% see an increase, 14% see a decline, and I think the 14% compared to other regions is actually by far the lowest. So if you will, the dealers themselves are actually relatively confident that we get at least a solid year with potential of small increase in terms of the number.
Yeah, I know that's probably not the most satisfying answer that you were looking for there in terms of a up or a down direction, but I do think that is probably the most nuanced answer in terms of what is top of mind for folks who are in the space supporting the arts. Go for it. Yeah, great. But I like the spicy questions. Keep them coming. That was great. We'll wake everybody up in the morning.
Thanks a lot for your presentation. My name is Minas. I am a valuation and project finance consultant. So I have maybe a specific question. Lots of coverage about the world market volume in terms of dollars, in terms of the number of transactions. I also wanted to know what's your opinion on the overall weighted average art market return, annual return, because as I understand, it's even common to buy large art pieces using debt, and the cost of finance was mentioned. So I expect that some people invest in art and expect some returns, and this market is not as transparent as equity market, for example. And what's your opinion on, let's say, a diversified art market portfolio?
I love this question because, as I mentioned at the outset, actually, I was an economics and art history major, and I thought about writing a senior thesis, and you're talking like regression analysis of prices, right? But yet it's probably one of the more, it is hard, right? There's opacity to it, to the market itself, and so it's hard to get that data. I think this might be a tough question. I'll probably give my panelists a little bit of time to think about it, but I'll at least start with, I'll give you a very personal anecdote. I'm a value investor, right? So I buy something, and I've never sold any of the arts that I've acquired, actually. I love it, right? I love developing the relationship with artists, especially with contemporary artists who I get to grow through time and follow through their career. To me, like, that is a return, right? It's non-monetary, right? Maybe it'll be monetary one day. Like, that'd be lucky and good, right? But how beautiful is it to actually develop those relationships and actually have that discourse through time? Now I have friends who acquire and who are very disciplined in thinking about, okay, this is up now, I'm looking at the auction reports, right? I'm thinking about selling. And so then, but you have to remember, in the market or in the ecosystem, you have both of these different types of collectors, right? Institutions, right? They think about not just, it's not really return, right? It's also about what is that discourse through time, through history, right? Of what pieces will outlast, you're talking centuries, right? In terms of reflecting the zeitgeist of today. And so to me, again, I'll just probably put that, I love your question because I also have a finance background, and so I get why you're asking it, but I think we need a broader definition of what do you mean by return, right? And so I'll give it to my panelists here, but does that help in a little bit?
Yes, I understand that lots of people buy art for inspiration and non-for-profit purposes.
What is the ROI?
But I'm very specifically asking your opinion on the investment
Beautiful.
return in percent.
Okay.
There is. I mean, that's an impossible question. There's global market indices that people do, but they're impossible to hold as an investor. So, and they show kind of variable returns. You pick a period and you can get the return you want. They do tend to show that the standard deviation is much higher, so it's you can generate okay returns if you were somehow able to hold a diversified portfolio, but the risk is much higher. And it's just, I do think there's a real danger. There's been so much financial stuff over the last few years kind of resurfacing again. It was there at the beginning of my kind of career in the art market, and it's kind of come now a little bit to the fore again. And people are using even my global figures to estimate returns on the market, which is just so wrong. I mean, that doesn't give you any indication at all of the returns to investing in an individual artist or in a sector or anything like that. So even I would just, rather than picking a number, I would just advise so much caution of trying to find a return for the art market, because you can find anyone you want. I can give you a list of academic papers if you're interested in looking at some. And they can show positive returns or negative returns depending on the period you choose. It's more risky. It's the highs and lows are much higher because it's such a heterogeneous mix of different artists performing in different ways. So I would tend, if you're looking at it financially, I would focus on the kind of risk diversification benefits of putting art into a portfolio. And returns are going to be whatever they're going to be. They can go up and they can go down, but it's the fact that it doesn't tend to move in the same ways. Different artists move in different ways with each other, and they tend to often move in different ways with other financial and investments. That's the real kind of financial value, I think, added, rather than focusing on returns, because they're all, with all returns that you look at, they're always based on past prices as well. So you have all the usual kind of caveats, but with art, all of those indices that gross together so many different things give you no indication of how your investment is going to perform, because they're impossible to hold as an investor.
Or I'm very aligned with actually what Claire is saying, and I would actually probably just maybe pose the question back in some ways like this, and this is for the broader group too, right? Or for the broader audience. One, like, what does it mean to actually hold a diversified portfolio? What are you diversifying on, right? You could say, I'm going to diversify on like blue chip artists, right? Established artists, mid-career, emerging artists, right? In the same way as you can think about companies, right? Or you can think about actually there are different themes that we actually want to diversify on, right? Actually, Xiaoming mentioned, right, there's a rise in actually thinking about gender, right, like identity and things like that in the art world. And you can also equally see that. You go through the fair here, there are folks who focus on ecology, environment, right? They think about the intersectionality of like identity and also their like lived experience in that way. And so, you know, again, not to bring this again into the two, just in the art space of it, but I would think about it that way, right? I come from a very, like, I worked at a large macroeconomic hedge fund prior to this, right? We think about diversified portfolios all the time. And yet, as a collector, for me, that is one of the hardest, it's almost a question I can't even ask. It's so hard to even know what that could possibly even look like. And so I probably would pose it back to you, not to push it back, if that's okay, Okay, over here. This side of the room has woken up. I love it. Come online.
大家好，谢谢嘉宾们的分享。
Well, greetings. I'm a little bit tense because I have very few opportunities in coming into contact with art. I'm Li Chunxiao. I am a mom of 2 children. I have a very simple question to ask. Have you noticed in the mainland of China, in the museums, in the art exhibitions, a lot of KOLs would bring a lot of visitors to the museums, but what they care about is whether they get good pictures from them. So this kind of KOL-led wave, is it a channel? Do you think it is a way of bringing the young visitors to the museums and the art galleries? If this is not the right way, what is a better way? And then in Xiaohongshu, Weibo, Weixin, and short videos, all these new media platforms, what do you think is their value in propagating art in the public? So these 2 questions. Thank you for the questions. My Chinese is not as good as yours, but definitely Xiaoming can help. But let me try to translate a bit.
Actually, right, Wang Hong, like influencers are actually visiting these museums and actually bringing large audiences to them, right? Is that a good or a bad thing in some ways, right? And then also a lot of these apps, Xiaohongshu, Weibo, right, in terms of actually also perpetuating these, you know, call it like news or encouraging people to engage in art in this way too in institutional settings, right? How should we be thinking about that as well? And I'll actually turn the question probably to anybody who would like to answer it, but 我翻译的还可以吗？还非常好。Okay, 还可以. All right. They said my translation was okay, so that's okay. Okay. Let's try it out. Okay.
You will also getting the next line for Li Bai's poems. So
yeah, I had to memorize. So
her name is Chunxiao. Is the early dawn of
a nursery rhyme, actually. Yeah.
Spring, yes, her name is the beginning of spring. And
I had to memorize that as a child.
Mother of 2 children, right? 2个孩子. Yeah, so she's concerned about her kids' education, especially arts education. So I grew up in an intellectual family where my parents are professors of science and technology from Shanghai Jiao Tong University. So I grew in the labs, and I was rebellious when I was a teenager. I wanted to study arts and culture, but I could not find a teacher, or the arts education was very limited 30 years ago, and now suddenly that you are seeing the influencers that really talking about the exhibitions, and I think for the kids you need our way to gain the knowledge is to find the right channels to really studying art or whatever you want to study systematically and academically, because I chose the academic path to learn art history. And however, the museum shows and the great museum shows on single artists or on certain themes that you cannot learn from the text or from the classrooms. So I think besides listening to these social influencers, and also important to find the right school to really study art systematically, the right path is very important for you to gain the knowledge and wisdom.
Yeah. So would anybody else like to touch on the question?
Well, my son is not yet 2 years old. I don't know. Actually, I brought a picture. I'm not sure we can
Do we
show
have
the
the
picture.
image? So
Is it
remember when I
possible?
asked everybody to share an image of an artwork that particularly intrigued or compelled them? Adrian was like, I actually have an artwork from my son who's 22 months, right? 22 months. And so maybe we'll see if we can find it.
exactly.
There it is.
So
pretty talented for 22 months. Yeah, exactly.
I'm very proud to show that at Art Basel. So
Thank you. Yeah, exactly. See, let me tell you the ROI on this piece, man. Exactly. Get in now.
that definitely made it on the wall. So it's interesting. I think here in Hong Kong, at least you have the privilege that kids go to nursery or pre-nursery school at a very early age. So I'm Swiss. In Switzerland, you go to kindergarten probably with 5 years old. He's going to pre-nursery school in 14 months, and now he's, after 8 months there, that's his latest piece of art, which there's a fish somewhere, but then he went all crazy, and I actually love it. And I just think it's important to expose the child very, very early to art. I will bring my son this afternoon to the Art Basel as well. So, and I think Claire's report also shows that, for example, art fairs, there's 19 new art fairs last year in mainland China. There are a few also that dropped out through the pandemic, but sort of exposing children very early stage to art, bring them and let them express themselves through art is actually, I think it's one of the biggest and the most important aspects of learning art and keeping kids interested into art.
Thank you, Adrian. Thank you also for sharing this. I knew we had it somewhere in our back pocket. 这个还可以吗？你觉得你的问题回答了吗？
So have we answered your question? You think we've answered it?
You have the fire, you have the earth, you have the
Water,
earth,
yeah.
and the 5 elements all
That's real
together.
hard. Okay, another question right here up in the front. Great.
Good morning, 4 experts. Thank you very much for your talking this morning. So I used to manage and operate an international art fair in mainland China. And also after pandemic, I'm doing sort of like art and business consultancy. My question could be a little bit unrealistic. So we were talking about NFT market, and also we were talking about so many money in the NFT market. But my concern would be, and it could be a little bit pessimistic about the China NFT market, and especially in the future, the art market in the China meta world in the future. Because the China meta world in the future could be a local era network. It's a metaphor. For example, the meta world in China could be Baidu, and the worldwide meta world could be Google. So in the future, the art world in the meta world or the NFT market in China, and also, as we all know, in the future, there's also less and less population bonus in China. So as you can imagine, so how it would be development in the future, and also for the art and culture thing in China, it could be like managed by the Culture Bureau. And also, if we talk about the real world, every exhibition, every art fair, art expo in China, before the fair already starts on site, there could be the censorship in advance. So in the future, this kind of art market in the, how do you say, in the virtual world, how could we maybe solve this kind of problem? Thank you very much.
Thank you for your question. It's a tough question. Thank you. I asked for tough questions, and then we get tough questions. I think it's you get what you ask for. That's good. Well, one, I think actually, Claire, you could probably hit on the NFT question actually, because that was in the art market report, grounded actually in some figures in terms of just actually in relation to last year versus the year before, some of the numbers, we actually saw a contraction actually on that front. And then the second part of the question is a little bit more philosophical. I think we might have to wrestle with that a bit collectively here, but I'll at least give you the first one. How about that?
Sure, I'm not an expert in NFTs either, but I just have tracked it kind of externally on platforms outside the art market as well as in addition, because it was such a big deal in 2021. And we saw that huge rise. I mean, the market started out in 2020 as about 20 million, and it's now, and it rose to kind of billions. Yeah, and even last year with a considerable drop, it was still, I think, close to 2 billion. So it's grown exponentially. But I still don't quite understand how China will really engage with cryptocurrencies. So that seems to be the kind of the missing link there, how it'll really grow. While there is the kind of regulatory issue there. I mean, Adrian, you might know more on that front than I do, but that's the kind of stumbling block I would see with China's development. I think the NFT market itself, I was expecting it to have just been dead and gone, but I was really surprised when we looked at the data again last year. It's the spikes of activity, but it spikes around really interesting projects that artists are doing, not just spikes from people frantically reselling for money. So the average resale period of an art-related NFT in 2021 was 30 days. So people were buying something and selling it within 30 days. And if you compare that to the art market, which is 30 years, is the average if you look at kind of things. So it was a very, very speculative market. So if some of that activity is gone, it's no loss to the artist. If people are buying things more on the aesthetic and content-based importance of things, that's probably a good thing, even though the market's gone down.
Oh, certainly in that. Actually, maybe even to the earlier question, that market actually has the most transparency in terms of pricing. And so that one you could definitely do regression analysis on in that way. And so, but Adrian, did you also want to touch on this before we wrestle with the
just
bigger
briefly, I mean, it's a tough question. I mean, you clearly can see there's a correlation between the whole Bitcoin market and crypto market to the NFT market. So crypto has reached new highs, all-time highs actually. Just now, and you can see that NFT demand is going up, but and it's banned in China, so the whole crypto area. So that's definitely a challenge. But what I actually find more interesting is out of this whole technology, out of the crypto market, blockchain, there's actually a very new trend. So there are companies that are trying to tokenize basically art through blockchain. There's also companies, for example, that you can buy pieces of NFTs, and so basically the whole NFT is actually getting fractionalized, and you can buy fractions of that. So, and I think out of these trends, we will probably see, and it's coming also out of your report, a digital aspect, and actually in China, people are buying digital through online, for example. That has increased quite a lot. So, and I think over the next few years, we probably will see also transition and the rechange of the whole art market, the way we're maybe buying or experience art through technology. And I think that's definitely a trend that will come, in particularly blockchain technology will be a very interesting one, particularly when it comes to art.
Thank you, Adrian. And the second question that the second part of your question, I'll be very upfront and honest, right? This, we as a panel here, we're probably not actually the right folks to know that answer. I mean, if we were, I think we would be having very different jobs in this world. But maybe I'll just respond or react to maybe like the broad strokes of it, which I think are important considerations, right? Like one, who gets to control or manage or influence or, say like what can actually be shared. And this is not just actually within, China or Asia either. The United States and Europe, they're also actually wrestling with this too right now, right? In a country, in the United States, freedom of speech. And, you see all sides of it coming after actually, different artists or institutions on the very topic. So who actually gets the agency to have that, right? I think that is one, question that is a thread out of what you're asking here. And then two, in terms of the platforms and the infrastructure, who then also has the power, the resources to create these? And who creates these, right? You're talking about, we've imagined metaverses where you have museums or private collections, you can walk them around them, right? Apple Vision Pro, Oculus, whatever you use, right, type thing. And yet, who has the power of creating those? I just named 2 different companies, right? 2 different technology companies. And you're right, they might be split geographically one day, just given data servers or privacy. And so I think these are questions we're probably going to keep wrestling with, to be honest, for decades to come, right? I mean, Xiaoming's research, she touched on artificial intelligence, right? She touched on actually the very digital ecosystem too, that is also on the rise here as well, right? So did Claire's research. You see this now as being part of the institutional research, as part of the corporate research too. And so that is, I don't think any of us have, I don't want to give you a false answer on this one. And so if we had answers, it'd probably be covered in the article over here that's being written, and who knows where else. And the internet doesn't forget. And I know this is going on YouTube after, so I'm going to leave it at that. How's that? Okay, thank you. Thank you for the silent clap. Okay, wow, I'm glad we're getting some spicy questions. I knew Tishan had a spicy question for me earlier, but maybe he doesn't have to ask it anymore because these other ones are so good. Well, we have about 5 minutes left. I'm happy to take a couple more questions if there's anything that is particularly top of mind. I'm happy to, and oh yeah, Tishan Su, everybody. I mean, this is like, he's an amazing artist. He taught me, again, sculpture freshman year of college, gave me a B, and that'll be the last time I reference it in this past 10 minutes. Hi, Tishan.
Hi.
Hi.
If I knew that was coming, I'm not sure I'd ask a question here. But anyway, I have 2 questions. One is somewhat naive. I guess it would be more for Claire. In terms of your data, when you say you're getting the data from the dealers and the auction houses, so how reliable is the data from the dealers? I mean, is it just voluntary? I mean, where is the data coming from? I'm just curious.
Well, we do pretty big surveys of dealers. I was doing it twice a year, and I've kept it to once a year now, not because they get surveyed for so many places, and it's like a lot of economic data that's based on surveys. It's as reliable as the respondents are. I mean, we do clean it as much as possible, and we improve the instruments over time. I've been doing them. The good thing about my research, I suppose, I've been doing it for a long time, so we do have a kind of a good benchmark, longitudinal studies of the market. But it's based on surveys. But I mean, so is a lot of the economic indicators that you read about and take as kind of gospel is based on surveys as well. So it's either that or stick your finger in the air and kind of guess. I mean, there is some bigger companies that are subject to kind of financial requirements where they have to submit returns, and you can get financial information on some of those. But the dealer market is made up of very small businesses for the most part. So we rely on surveys, and we get great support from the gallery associations and the fairs in promoting the surveys. And I think over time, the galleries and dealers themselves have realized the importance of this kind of research. If they want to speak to government, if they want to lobby for something, if they want to get kind of better regulations or whatever, the first thing governments want to know is, okay, how much is the industry worth? How many people does it employ? That kind of thing. So they've begun to engage a lot more. It's always a work in progress every year. We had the highest number of responses last year to the surveys, but I've always kind of explained, it's on a normal distribution curve, the left tail of very, very small businesses probably doesn't get included, and there's some very top dealers at the top, so it's the bulk of dealers in the middle, and middle to higher end, that get included in the surveys, and we have to estimate the rest, so it's a modeling process as well. But we do the best we can. And even the auction sector isn't perfect either. Some of the auction houses were taking great strides forward in publishing data, and now some of them have started pulling back again. So we're boasting about how transparent the art market is becoming. In some ways it has, and in other ways it's as opaque as ever. So we do our best to try and measure it the best we can.
Thank you, Claire. Number 2, Tishan, what else?
I have a broader question here. You talked about the democratization of the art market, particularly with the rise of technology, and particularly with NFTs, where perhaps artists will have direct contact with collectors more and more. It's partly what is happening with NFTs. So if that's were to happen, and that's going to be an increasing trend, will that erode the ability to even report what is actually going on into the future? And if we're talking about metaverses, then it gets even more private and localized. How do you Do you think about that, that
I
as
do
a
think
trend?
about it all the time.
Yeah.
And the NFT data, the data that's on blockchain and stuff is actually really easy. There's great data. You could do some really good research on that stuff. It's got micro level, transaction by transaction data. But artists themselves, I mean, I've done some studies for the Arts Council of England and the Irish Arts Council and different arts councils, and it was really difficult to put those samples of artists together. There's such a diverse set of people. I mean, you can only survey the ones that are registered with certain kind of funding bodies, and then some people are working 10 jobs and they don't define themselves as an artist, so they're a really difficult market to kind of corral. But that is the next big area that needs to be researched. It's a huge I'm sure growing area of sales that are not being represented in my figures. So it's a really important area, and I'm hopefully going to find some researchers to work with or alongside, or if somebody independently does it, because that is the missing piece that we're not gathering at the moment.
No, it's a great question, and I think maybe I'll just wrap with one thought, actually tying actually that Tishan's question and Claire, and actually each Xiaoming and also Adrian have touched on. Again, when we talk about global art market, right, and here, especially here in Asia, I really think the concept of an ecosystem, having an ecosystem view of who all the different players are in it, to the collective point here, and then in terms of, at the end of the day, we're really just talking about flows, to be honest, right? Flows between sources of capital and uses of capital, right? And here, you're talking about either whether you're talking about private collectors, dealers, institutions, all the different players. As much as we even seek to quantify it, right? And it's important because it actually informs how we can invest in and develop the infrastructures and ecosystem to further support, right, this type of culture and arts through time. Because at the end of the day, like, what is the goal, right? At the end of, but I actually always want to point it back to, it actually is what Claire was cautioning against, which is, though we are talking about the market, and though you have everybody here who actually are players in it type thing, at the end of the day, we're talking about supporting artists who are reflecting the zeitgeist of, of our contemporary times, right? Or call it our historical times through time. And also, what is the work of an artist to actually do that type of cultural work, right? It really is that. And what is the work of an institution to show it to? Or why does somebody actually collect? I really would focus back on the motivation for each of these, and then think about it against the landscape of, why might these numbers be increasing or decreasing, right? Or flowing into different regions, and what does that actually help support through time too? To me, I think that is, it is, this is the first of the conversations of this week here at Art Basel. And so as you go through, I hope you attend more of these panels, right? Each one has a different area of focus, but I would hold that context in your head of what actually is driving the flow of capital in this way, and then also for what use and what motivation is it actually hoping to achieve. And so I leave us actually with that. Again, I'm asking back the question to the audience, because now you've asked us a lot of tough questions too. But are there any last closing remarks before I wrap up?
Yeah, just on the flow. Actually, I have a video, and it's on the flow. The artist is Cynthia, and the flow is the tech.
Yeah, that's right.
Computer-generated flow.
Okay, good. You introduced it. Let's see if we can play it. I'm putting Emma to hard work back there.
Yes. Yeah.
I like that we're ending on art, actually. So let's do that.
Yes, so I'm going to quote the artist's words, and she said, so all our digital work is based on the Navier-Stokes equations, one of the most complex mathematical formulas that have plagued mankind in 200 years, chaos theory and intricate underlying logic codes, which transformed ink art creations into a program. The new artistic conception created by these processes and programs bring a sense of familiarity but also a strangeness of the future. Different from ink art in the physical world, the body of the ink art is completely extracted and decoded autonomously in a program where time is stretched infinitely.
That's beautiful. I didn't plan for this, but somehow we started with data visualization and we ended with data visualization. And so I'm going to start. Oh yeah, Claire, you had a piece of art. That's a great question.
I'm terrible.
Thank you,
I hate being
Kavya.
put on the spot, and I didn't come with a picture or anything like that. So we were just talking about it before, and so I thought I'd mention somebody that I'm actually very interested in seeing, because I just found out that she's got something. It's tomorrow evening.
Tomorrow evening, at Tycoon.
It's Pan Daijing. She's an artist and composer. She's a young kind of female Chinese artist. She's based in Berlin, and somebody just in Dublin, a Brazilian friend of mine, told me about her. So I've been looking at her work online, and I'm going to go and see her tomorrow evening. So she does kind of large-scale, site-specific things with music as well. So I was just that's one thing I was delighted to find out, because when you've seen something online, it's never the same thing as seeing, especially with work like that. So that was the only thing I was going to mention.
I love. Great last question, Kavya. Thank you. And so thank you, everybody. Wow. Thank you for helping us bring this. I mean, it's a wide-ranging thing, and then we brought it back home, and I'm really grateful for the collective help in doing that. So I hope you all have a great afternoon, and we'll be around for a couple more things. All right. Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you, Colleen. Thanks, everyone.